So there's no question that technology has allowed our lives to be more efficient, and in that way kind of simplifies our lives. But we want to kind of help you understand how in some ways technology is complicating our lives a bit, is actually interacting with us in a way that causes us to be less at rest, and often can make us be more self-focused and even more isolated. And as the slide is showing you got to have a balance of body, mind, and soul, and you have to be intentional about it. So
you want to be sure, you all have seen this, you see how much Ann spends on her phone, texting lots of you, that we're not anti-technology. It's here, but it's about the balance. And we can tell you even in our personal life, it's how we stay connected to our granddaughter when we're away from her, and she's taken her first steps recently, and we watched that. But there's something going on that's different. It's not like your grandparents' technology, and there's a possibility of a reinforcing loop where the technology becomes more central, you become more dependent on it, and companies make more money off you. But what may be at cost is your relationship with God and with human community. And so I'm going to try to help you with that.
And we've definitely noticed a difference that since technology has been a big part of our life and our marriage and our relationships with other people. And we've even really recognized a change in our sense of peace. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that.
So how is it affecting us?
Well, I think we're going to start by praying, right?
Oh, is that our plan?
Yeah.
Again, we're not pros at this, so Matt might have prayed, but if we could just for a moment, Lord, if you can help us communicate clearly the challenges of technology, the wonders of technology, but also what may be different this time. And we just ask you to bless this time of fellowship with our church and this learning time. Amen.
So, you can see on the slide that there's been so many ways in which technology is affecting us. And most people probably don't spend all kinds of time thinking about how is technology impacting my life. But what happens as a result is that can kind of allow you to pick up and just kind of be moved with momentum and have decisions made for you. And we're going to try to encourage you today to think a little bit more deeply about it. Think why technology, how and why it's changed your life. And then even deeper, kind of think about how it's impacting your mind and your soul.
So on the thought about intentionality, we'll get into something where there's a concept of momentum in technology. It's fairly new concepts developed in the last couple of decades. But if you're not intentional about how you use technology, it has a tendency to actually carry away momentum. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how it's happening, and that the earlier you take intentional action with your technology, you can set in some good habits that can be helpful.
And Mark is going to take kind of the 10,000-foot view of this, kind of help us understand historically how technology and the revolutions that occurred in the past have impacted the world, how now is very, very different, and kind of give us a framework to understand what that's all about. So I'm going to do something a little bit more personal, like how it's impacting you, your spouse, and your children, your bodies and your minds. So Mark, if you can just kind of give us a sense of what happened in the past, how has that impacted the world? How does technology and its changes impact us? And how is it really different today?
All right. Well, so as you can see on some of the images here, there have been wonderful technological advances. You can see some of the pictures of glasses. If we didn't have the invention of glasses, I probably wouldn't be reading or interacting with information much at all. You see on the image air travel. My gosh, you can visit the world and visit distant relatives. Medical technologies increased longevity and then learning. But when all these technologies start to come together, it can have impacts that literally change the structure of life. And we've seen this before historically. And for those who don't know me, I'm a former history professor, history of technology. And so the image you'll have here is of the Industrial Revolution. It was a massive shift from agrarian, small towns, animals and humans into this industrial giant we built. And it had huge impacts. It had pollution, it had effects on child labor, and in many ways it was wonderful. I mean, you could live in northern climates and you have heat, but it was visible in the effects that were undermining children's welfare, their health, and even the air. And people took intentional action to make Clean Air Act. They made the national park system to save nature, and they put labor laws in place to protect children. The children are in children's right now instead of being out working. But something's happening now that isn't so evident. So on the next slide is about social media age. The social media age is really something that is cognitive. It's informational. It's influencing our minds and values. And you don't have evidence that you can point to saying, look, there's pollution in the air. We can't breathe this. Look, our children came back with missing fingers from the factory. And these can also influence value formation that by the time you understand what's happening, values have already started to change your children's behavior or your own and your marriage. And in the past, the information changes were happening with radio, with television, but they came more slowly over decades, 50 to 75 years, and you had the government regulating much of that, very aligned with churches, and now it's quite something different. So when you take all these things together, I'd just like to provide a framework of how to think about how our world has evolved and to kind of situate you. So the next slide you'll be seeing is actually kind of a build slide, and we'll go through this. But I've given this talk multiple times before, and it's helped frame people's decisions to take action. You can look at the world that it started out fairly simple with human and nature working together, and this is biblical times, and there were minimal machines, and it was some terrible times. The Roman Empire was built on slave labor. Jesus talked many times about how to treat your slaves. And thankfully, with the emergence of this second sphere here, this was the machine robotic realm. We're now getting robots, but that this actually freed people from egregious labor, and quite frankly, the Union Army, which liberated the South, was driven by mass machine production. The state of New York produced more output than the entire Confederacy. So machines helped liberate people from chattel slavery. But it started to have an effect on livelihoods, children labor, pollution, and now something unanticipated has happened. And this is cyberspace. Some call it the metaverse. Some of the old people watched it called The Matrix. But people didn't see this coming. They anticipated robots and machines by hundreds of years, but only in the last 40 years, basically. The 40-year anniversary of a book called Neuromancer predicted this emergence of this place that's just full of information and values. And it is having a massive impact on us. And we need to situate ourselves of how to preserve what's good about human relationships and community, which our church is so important about, but also have the benefits of being able to have information like this tape recording we're doing now and making available to you. But as Anne's going to get into, there are some profound effects happening to you, your children, and community, and the science is now backing this up. We gave this first talk 10 years ago, and a lot of it was speculation by what Anne was seeing in her classroom as a teacher. And now there's science to back this up. And so, Anne, why don't you tell us, what is it doing to our body, minds, and soul?
All right, well, if we start with the body just really quickly, we're certainly seeing some reactions to it. One is eye strain, texture's thumb, but they're actually, doctors are finding this thing called tech neck, where actually there's a bony spur that's beginning to grow on the back of some even younger people's heads to counterbalance the weight of the head as we're constantly bending over looking at our devices. So pretty scary stuff. But I think the thing that's most impactful to me is thinking about how it's impacting our brain. And there are 4 systems of the brain that I want to talk about that I think will give you a picture as to why there needs to be intentionality in the use of your technology. And the first one, as you can see on the slide, is the pleasure system. It's kind of a funny picture, but I wonder how many of you all have had trouble with your children getting them off of their gaming devices or off of their other devices. Well, I want to talk a little bit about why that might happen. It's appearing as if technologies actually can wear out our pleasure systems. And let me explain what I mean by that. Dopamine is a chemical that's in the brain, and it makes you feel good, right? So having the right amount of it is pretty important. Too little, and you can feel depressed. You can have all kinds of mental health problems. Too much is where addictions come in. And when it comes to technology, all the stimulation from gaming and social media, YouTube videos, and even online gambling, one of the things that our legislature was dealing with this past session, it can hyperstimulate the dopamine production in your brain. And this hyperstimulation is called dopamine flooding. The result is that your brain's pleasure system is less responsive to previously enjoyable activities like sitting around the dinner table and having dinner with your family, or taking a walk with a friend, or joining and enjoying a community group. So in essence, what it's saying is that the pleasure set point of your brain actually is changed, and it requires more and more of this pleasurable activity to actually enjoy basic things that you used to enjoy.
You know, if I could just add, Ann mentioned there was legislation just finished in Bismarck, and the Senate voted it down 30 to 15, but they wanted to expand sports gambling to high schools, colleges, and pro sports. The data coming out is frightening that 18 to 24-year-old men are most susceptible to sports gambling. And I met with some students just yesterday, and they said it's taking the joy out of the game for the game's sake. And after the game's over and the gambling's over, just like Ann said, there's this downer, and that brings her point about, people are less happy watching the game unless they made money.
Yeah, exactly.
And fortunately, North Dakota's holding the line on that. Mm-hmm. But what about happiness, Ann?
Yeah, so the data...
Because I know you're always happy in our marriage.
Oh, always happy.
Right.
Always.
Yeah.
No, but the data is definitely bearing it out, because despite the increase of access to these time-saving and entertainment tools that we have, the wealthiest countries in the world are the least happy. They're the most miserable. And what does that say to you? Interesting, too, a recent Wall Street Journal article is written by a doctor of psychiatry and a professor at Stanford University. And she shares her experiences. She's been meeting with patients for 25 years or whatever. But recently, she's had a great number of otherwise healthy young people who are coming in with crippling depression and anxiety. And she said that 20 years ago, what she would have done is prescribe for them an antidepressant, but in talking with them about their lifestyle choices, now she prescribes a dopamine fast. In other words, she gets them off their devices for 30 days to reset their pleasure point. So this is a real thing. This is really what's going on.
And it was something else interesting, because I read some of Ann's stuff. She does the research and I read some of the stuff. But they talked about the happiness level of young girls, teenage to early 20s, and things like self-image, depression, suicidal tendencies, etc. And they said the numbers were almost constant from 1970 to 1980 to 1990 to 2000, and all of a sudden there's this, statisticians in the audience would know this, but a statistically significant deviation from the norm, and it aligned with when the iPhone hit critical mass in the United States. And so they now have the data, which Ann and I were just kind of grappling with intuition 10 years ago, but now the data is coming out that, in fact, the proliferation of the iPhone directly aligned with a radical shift in young women's happiness and their image of themselves. And
part of what's going on there is in the tranquility system, which is the next system I want to talk about, and that is that is where cortisol is produced. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's produced by your adrenal glands, and it's in response to excitement or demand. It's your fight or flight response. And your brain, when it's constantly being stimulated by technology, continues to build cortisol, right? And all this gaming and texting, tweeting, Facebooking, it produces a stress response. And that increases the cortisol, which, interestingly, it blocks tranquility receptors, causing the brain to shut down the natural tranquilizers that it typically produces. Now, that, of course, is to get your body ready to either run from the tiger or fight the tiger, right? But in reality, it's just the excitement from our use of technology. Interestingly, how is cortisol burned off?
Well, that's interesting. I've been in some different stressful jobs in my life. I was in the Navy. I served in Afghanistan. And it wasn't until I got back to the United States talking to my daughter, who's a nurse, when she saw all the stress I was under, and I would try to then read to reduce stress or watch a movie to reduce stress, watching a screen. And she goes, Dad, the science is out. You've got to exercise. You have to run, walk to burn the cortisol. in fact, there were times, quite frankly, when I'd read the Bible and I read the Old Testament about, someone smote someone and they'd smite this person, and I'm like, I can feel my stress is not going down. And she goes, it's a physical reaction of all the time you've spent on screens in advance, and you need to get out and walk and exercise. And
if you have a desk job where your kid's sitting at their desk all day long and they think they're going to come home and play a few rounds of the video games or scroll through social media, and that will relax you, in reality, it's just pumping in the cortisol, right?
Yeah.
So the next system is the memory system, and the memory system is interesting. I think we all think these days that we're good at multitasking, but science is showing that we really aren't very good at it. It significantly reduces our ability to retain new information. But not only that, if you think about relationships, multitasking is definitely not conducive to building relationships, as this picture here shows. I mean, how satisfied are you in a relationship when you're sitting there talking to somebody and they're on their iPhone, they're checking texts?
And that's never happened in our marriage, but
No,
we hear theoretically
no.
some husbands either watching a sports channel on their iPhone when their wife is talking to them. I've heard that alleged.
Yes,
But
it's
Anne's
happened, I
wondered what
hear.
that would be like if I would be distracted when she's
Yes,
trying to talk to me.
it has happened to us. Learning system. Yeah, you want to chat about that a little bit?
Again, I used to be a teacher, and the reality is if you're on your iPhone too much, it almost seems counterintuitive that, I'm getting more information. Well, actually, it can lead to fatigue, brain fatigue, or neural fatigue. And at that point, you're not learning. So if you've got a child or yourself, you're having to learn something new at the job, and you've been on the iPhone too much, you've actually reduced your capacity to learn. And you often see people, they have their earbuds in, and they're constantly listening to TED Talks or other things. They may be actually fatiguing their brain, and then this can also have an effect on quality of sleep before you go to sleep. And so some scientists argue now that you need 1 hour of actually no technology before you go to bed, which could mean looking at a paper book or reading a paper Bible or something, or just meditating or talking with your spouse. But
the other sad thing about what's going on with all of this stimulation is it's disrupting our creativity. And I mean, that's what humans are all about, right? Being creative. But less and less are we able to be creative when we are so tied to our technology. So I guess our big question then, we're in church, so how is this impacting our spiritual life? And one of the things that's interesting is, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." Well, for us to be quiet, sit still, listen. I don't know about you, but I do a devotion every morning, and I fight every morning with my brain spinning in, whether or not it's hearing a ping or just my mind going. It's hard to settle it down and just concentrate. That's all of the stimulation. But then also God calls us to be in community, right? He wants us to not isolate ourselves, and technology is really helping us to continue to do that. Community provides important work. It allows us to have encouragement and support from other people, but it also kind of forces us to expand our friend group, to think and listen to different perspectives, and really learn and grow spiritually from that direction. It's very hard to grow if we are just simply taking in what technology is feeding us all the time. And the social media companies really do give you what you want to hear. Like once you start an interest in one particular area, they're going to just keep feeding you that. Well, how likely is it for you to grow and change and understand a different perspective if you're just being fed never-ending amounts of the same? So we really need to push out of our comfort zones. That's so important to just begin to be able to expand our minds.
One thought on this: there were people early on when the internet started to develop, and some of the older people in the congregation, basically people born before 1985, I think, that they thought the internet was going to just reduce loneliness and connect more people. And now the internet is filling with, YouTube videos, deep fakes, botnets. They're not even real people. You're not even sure if you're, actually seeing a real image for some of the young people that might go to, Tinder or something. Are those even real images or doctored images? Are there even real people behind that? So it's really surprised people that there is no substitute for in human contact, being together, coming to church. But it's not going to work naturally because, as Ann's going to talk about, the companies don't make money by you coming to church and sitting together. They don't make money you going to community group. They make money if you're watching Netflix, you're on the YouTube, and they're getting viewers. And I have to admit myself, I was invited to a dinner probably a year ago, and I was at a table of people I didn't really know. I got in late. My friends were at another table, and Ann was visiting the grandchildren. And I remember there was a new movie had just come out on Netflix, and I kind of excused myself early to go home, and I got my popcorn and my soda pop in my house by myself watching this, and a later thought, those people, they weren't from Bismarck, they were from a small town, and thought, they had come to visit with people at the table at this dinner, and I left and made more money for Netflix. And so I've been a victim of that, but now Ann can show me why it wasn't my fault, because the companies made me do it. And so what is this thing about persuasive design, Ann? Tell me.
Persuasive design is interesting because it really, it's used a lot to help people make positive behavioral changes. But here's the problem. Social media and gaming companies have kind of hijacked it. They're hiring psychologists to work with their designers to hook you on their platforms. So basically what they're doing is the rewards, they kind of dole out like they act like slot machines, right? And they give friend requests, likes, game rewards, loot boxes, and just at the right time so that they just keep you staying on their device. And of course, children and teenagers are most susceptible to this because the executive functioning portion of their brain is not fully developed, and that's the area where it deals with impulse control, right? So I hope you hear what we're saying, and no, it doesn't completely negate your responsibility here, but what we're saying is if you're trying to get your child off of their technology and you're struggling with it, it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent because you can't do that, or even that your child is like antisocial because they'd rather be on their devices than in with the family dinner. Basically, what's occurring in the brain as a result of either the intended consequences of technology companies or the unintended consequences of your brain chemistry, it makes it practically impossible to compete with the digital world. And so this whole industry is gamed to try to keep you isolated, keep you, in a sense, out of church, out of community group, and just on their platforms.
And if you have time, you find this interesting, Ann and I will be at the service on Sunday, could talk more, but there is a Netflix special, so again, using technology, but it's called The Social Dilemma, and they interview senior executives who admit to exactly what they've done, and they actually limit their family and their children's time on the devices they want you to spend time on, in which they earn stock options. So it's a rapidly developing area, and so what can we do about it?
Yeah, there's good news. We don't want to be all the naysayers. There's good news because God made our brains pliable. We can change. What we would recommend is start by praying, asking God to show you where your areas of struggle are. And we actually have a couple resources that are available to help you do that, a digital assessment quiz. Pray and ask God to show what areas do you have to make changes in. And then begin to do some very interesting things like practice being still. Practice even being bored. Boredom is the classroom of creativity, right? And then think about talking to your friends, your family, brainstorming ways in which you can be more present, things that you can do that might help you to be less digital and more, as one writer calls it, embodied, part of your embodied life. Create a family media agreement that will help to create boundaries so that your family will be able to balance and use technology in a healthy way. And then finally, we're just encourage you to put down your devices, right? Develop ideas and interests and include others as you do that. Take small steps at first, like instead of deciding to read Moby Dick or something, read a short book or for 5 minutes. Play a card game with your family. Decide to take a short walk with a friend. Something, just make some steps in the direction of being really present, right? Decide to do the difficult work of being uncomfortable, being bored even. Share these things with your family and friends, and then use some of the resources that we've given you. Create a family media agreement. Ask your children. This is a very important thing. Ask your children to sit down with you and make the agreement together. Have them help to decide what boundaries are appropriate. have them decide what the consequences should be if the boundaries are broken. You will be surprised. They may have more stringent boundaries than even you would have. So, but basically, we just encourage you to pray that God would give you the ability to see where boundaries are needed. But once you decide on those boundaries, be intentional and follow through. And I think you might find that your life will be much more simplified, much more enjoyable, and your life will be a lot more pleasurable.
And then, about community, you have communities here at the church. You have a church community that meets on Sunday. So you have a built-in place to start reconnecting with people. Because I know we've got some people in our business now that work totally remote. They aren't even close enough to get together with real people. And that way we talked about, is that a problem? But so, come back on Sundays, be with people, have the coffee, and get active in your community group. And then, if we have one of those rare days where it's 20 below zero and the roads are snowy, then you can watch church remotely. But it really is important to be, like Ann said, embodied as a real physical human being and not mediated by technology. And you're going to have some stuff available for them, right? There's a family agreement they could get.
There's some resources that we'll make available to you. So,
thanks for tuning in.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And it reminds me of a scripture that I just find so important. John chapter 1 says this. It says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." Jesus in John chapter 1 is being referred to as the Word. It was an ancient Greek term that has to do with the logic that defines reality, the logos. And John makes the audacious claim that the logos that all these Greek thinkers were thinking about was actually Jesus Christ, who came now as a person. And he says, "The Word became flesh," John 1:14, "and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus didn't stay a distant concept. God wanted to come close. God wanted to be in person, physically with us. And one translation says, God became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. The life of Jesus shows God's desire to move us from complex isolation and into intentional, intimate relationships. So our encouragement to you this week is going to be intentional together. You can click the link for a family screen covenant, which we'll post next to the video posting on our Worship Anywhere page at surprisechurch.com/worship-anywhere. Be intentional with people that you know and live with, and make a plan, a covenant of how you're going to engage technology and use screens. And then second, just be together. Being intentional together is good, but also just being together is important. And whether that's joining a community group, or if you're at a distance, we can help you form a campfire community group wherever you live. And just recognize the importance of flesh and blood relationships, of putting the screens down for a time and being a human being, because God became a human being to be with us. And he wants us to live physically present lives with one another, not distracted and isolated. The gospel is meant to propel us to real people in real community who humbly love and accept one another as God came to humbly love and accept us. Thank you for watching. God bless you guys, and we'll see you again soon.